There's a certain kind of person who walks through the world quietly, carrying everyone else's weight, who feels what others feel before they've even said a word. They walk into a room and immediately sense the tension. They can tell who's angry, who's pretending, who's hurting, and who's hiding it. They absorb it, all of it, like a sponge disguised as a human. And they call it empathy. But the truth is deeper, darker, and more painful. You absorb everyone's energy because you were trained to leave yourself first. It didn't start in adulthood. It started in childhood, in the rooms where your emotions were too loud, your needs were too inconvenient, and your truth was too heavy for the people who raised you. You learned early that being yourself came at a cost. So you adapted. You learned to scan the emotional weather of others before you spoke. You learned to silence yourself before conflict could erupt. You learned to anticipate moods like a soldier trained for invisible war. And somewhere along the line, you mistook survival for compassion. Carl Jung said, "Until you make the unconscious conscious, it will direct your life and you will call it fate." What you call sensitivity now, that constant awareness of everyone's energy, isn't fate. It's conditioning. It's your nervous system doing what it was programmed to do: prioritize others to avoid danger. You call it empathy, but it's vigilance. You call it intuition, but it's self-erasure dressed as insight. You didn't learn how to feel, you learned how to disappear. You learned how to shapeshift into what others needed, how to shrink when they were angry, how to soothe when they were broken, how to brighten when they were dark. You became the emotional regulator of every room you entered, the unseen therapist, the peacekeeper, the quiet healer. You thought it was your gift, but it was your wound. You see, when a child grows up in a home where emotions are unpredictable, where love feels conditional, where peace depends on keeping others happy, they become hyper attuned to the world outside and disconnected from the world within. They learn that safety doesn't come from self-expression, but from self-abandonment. That to be loved, they must first disappear. And so they grow into adults who are experts at understanding everyone but themselves. This is why you feel other people's emotions as if they're your own, because you were never allowed to fully have your own. You've become an emotional chameleon, changing color with every environment, every person, every demand. You've turned survival into sensitivity and called it compassion, but it's time to tell the truth. You are not just feeling others, you are carrying them. And the reason you can't put them down is because somewhere in your nervous system, it still feels unsafe to choose yourself. You were trained to leave yourself first, to abandon your truth for harmony, to silence your pain for peace, to suppress your anger for acceptance, to sacrifice your energy for belonging. This is not empathy, it's exile. And it's time to come home. The healing begins the moment you stop seeing your oversensitivity as a gift and start recognizing it as the residue of survival. Because empathy without boundaries is not love, it's self-erasure. And compassion without awareness is not divine, it's codependency disguised as holiness. You learn to merge with others to avoid being rejected. Now you must learn to separate from others to be free. You must learn the sacred art of being with someone without becoming them, of understanding without absorbing, of loving without losing. This requires unlearning what you were taught. You were taught that kindness means compliance. You were taught that peace means silence. You were taught that love means endurance. But none of that was love, it was control. It was the unconscious expectation that you would shape yourself around the comfort of others. You've been so used to reading everyone's emotions that your own body feels foreign to you. You feel anxious and call it intuition. You feel tired and call it empathy. You feel drained and call it love. But love does not drain you. Love nourishes you. And if what you're calling love is leaving you empty, then it was never love, it was extraction. Jung believed that the privilege of a lifetime is to become who you truly are. To do that, you must first stop being who everyone else trained you to be. You must learn to sit in your own energy long enough to recognize its texture, its color, its sound, to know where you end and others begin. At first, it will feel wrong. It will feel selfish. It will feel unnatural to say no, to prioritize your own peace over someone else's crisis, to walk away instead of absorbing the storm. Because your nervous system was built in the chaos, calm feels foreign. But that discomfort is not danger. It's detox. It's your soul remembering what it feels like to live inside itself again. When you stop absorbing, the world will resist. The people who once depended on your energy to regulate theirs will accuse you of being cold. They will say you've changed, and they will be right, because the version of you that existed to soothe others is dying. And in its place, something stronger, quieter, and infinitely freer is being born. You will start to notice how much of your life was built around managing other people's emotions, how much of your intuition was hypervigilance, how much of your love was self-neglect. You will start to see that peace was never something you had to earn. It was what remained when you stopped performing. This is what reclaiming your energy looks like. It's not about becoming less empathetic. It's about becoming more conscious. It's about seeing that you can feel deeply without dissolving, that you can love fully without abandoning, that you can care sincerely without carrying. You will learn to stay with yourself even when others are in pain. You will learn to observe emotions instead of absorbing them. You will learn to ask, is this mine? Before taking responsibility for someone else's chaos. And in doing so, you will begin to rebuild your nervous system from the inside out. You will realize that your energy was never meant to be an open door. It was meant to be a temple. Not everyone deserves access to it. Not every emotion belongs inside it. You get to choose who enters, what stays, and what leaves. This is what Jung called individuation, the process of becoming whole by integrating what was once unconscious. You integrate the part of you that abandoned yourself for others, and you bring it home. You integrate the part that learned to read others like maps, and you turn it inward to navigate your own soul instead. It's strange at first to feel yourself again after years of absence, to feel your own energy undiluted, unshaped, untouched by others' moods. It feels empty at first, but that emptiness is not void, it's space. Space for peace. Space for power, space for presence. And as you settle into that space, you realize something profound. You never had to protect yourself from feeling too much. You only had to protect yourself from leaving yourself. Because it wasn't the emotions that drained you, it was the exile. It was abandoning your center every time someone else's pain demanded your attention. Now you know better. You know that your sensitivity is sacred when it serves truth, and self-destructive when it serves fear. You know that compassion rooted in self-awareness heals, and compassion rooted in guilt harms. You know that being loving doesn't mean being limitless. It means knowing your limits and honoring them fiercely. You begin to speak less, but every word carries weight. You begin to give less, but every act carries intention. You begin to feel more, but you are no longer drowning. You are floating, because you are no longer leaving yourself. You are staying finally, fully, and fiercely. And when you stay, your energy stops leaking. It stabilizes. It strengthens. It becomes magnetic instead of porous. People can feel it, that difference between absorption and awareness, between pity and presence. You're no longer the emotional dumping ground. You're the mirror that reflects truth. The empath who once absorbed everything now emanates clarity. Their calm becomes their boundary. Their presence becomes their power. They no longer run from emotion. They let it pass through them like light through glass. This is what awakening feels like. Not escaping sensitivity, but owning it. Not numbing emotion, but mastering it. Not leaving yourself for love, but loving yourself enough to stay. You no longer absorb everyone's energy because you have remembered something sacred. You were never meant to be the vessel for the world's pain. You were meant to be the consciousness that transforms it by never abandoning your own. And as you begin to live from that remembrance, The world itself starts to feel different. You wake up, and instead of bracing for the day, for the moods, the expectations, the invisible weight you've carried for everyone else, you wake up in yourself. You breathe differently. You move differently. You no longer walk into a room scanning for danger or distress. You no longer read every silence as rejection, every sigh as disappointment, because your energy is no longer wired to seek external safety. It has become safety. The constant hum of anxiety that once defined you begins to fade, not because the world is softer, but because you are stronger. You stop absorbing other people's chaos because your body finally believes it doesn't have to. You've trained your nervous system to remember that not every emotion in the air belongs to you. And that shift, that subtle but sacred shift, changes everything. You start noticing how much of your intuition used to come from fear, how much of your sensitivity was actually hypervigilance, how much of your compassion was the lingering reflex to prove your worth. You can feel the difference now between the empathy that flows from truth and the empathy that leaks from trauma. You realize that empathy without embodiment is just exposure. And you don't need exposure anymore. You need embodiment. You need to stand fully in yourself and feel the power of your own presence before you try to hold anyone else's. Carl Jung spoke of the shadow, the unacknowledged parts of ourselves that we project onto others. For empaths, the shadow is often their own neglected self. You spend so much time understanding everyone else's wounds that you've ignored your own. You've built an identity around compassion while quietly starving for your own care. But the truth is, no amount of fixing others will ever heal the parts of you that still ache for attention. Because what you're searching for through others was never lost, it was just left behind inside you. You begin to meet those parts now. The inner child who silenced herself so peace wouldn't break. The teenager who learned that being quiet meant being safe. The adult who thought love was something to earn. You meet them all not to judge them, but to bring them home. And when you do, your empathy begins to evolve. It's no longer a survival mechanism. It becomes wisdom grounded, intuitive, sovereign. You no longer lose yourself in other stories because you've reclaimed your own. You can hold space without disappearing into it. You can listen deeply without being swallowed. This is what true compassion feels like. Not absorption, but awareness. It's not a flood. It's a river. It flows, but it knows its edges. It nourishes everything it touches, but it does not drown for anyone. The more you practice this, the more natural it becomes. You start to notice that peace isn't fragile, it's powerful. You realize that boundaries aren't walls, they're architecture. They don't isolate you. They structure you. They give you energy form. They give your heart direction. They turn your compassion from something scattered and draining into something intentional and alive. This is the rebirth of the empath, the transformation from absorber to alchemist. You no longer soak up energy, you transmute it. You no longer take on pain, you translate it into understanding. You no longer confuse ease for connection. You no longer confuse depletion for devotion. The world feels lighter not because it's changed, but because you have stopped carrying what isn't yours. The guilt that used to follow you like a shadow, the guilt for resting, for saying no, for not saving everyone, begins to dissolve. Because you understand now that guilt is just the echo of your old conditioning trying to pull you back into servitude. But awareness silences that echo. And in its place, you feel something you haven't felt in years: freedom. Freedom from obligation disguised as love. Freedom from responsibility disguised as purpose. Freedom from empathy that masqueraded as imprisonment. This is what real healing looks like. Not detachment, but discernment. Not numbing, but knowing. Not withdrawal, but wisdom. And now, when people come to you with their energy, you meet them differently. You don't take their pain into your body. You let it rest in your awareness. You don't make their emotions your responsibility. You make your presence your offering. You understand that your power was never in how much you could absorb, but in how much you could see without losing sight of yourself. The empath who used to carry others is gone. In their place stands something greater, the conscious empath. Still sensitive, still feeling, but now awake, aware of what belongs to them and what doesn't, aware of when to give and when to rest, aware that love is not measured by how much you lose, but by how fully you remain. This awareness begins to ripple through every area of your life. Your relationships change not because you demand it, but because your energy no longer supports imbalance. Your conversations deepen because you no longer speak from performance, but from presence. Your decisions simplify because you no longer chase approval, you follow alignment. And what once felt like an endless ache now feels like peace. Not the fragile peace that depends on keeping others calm, but the unshakable peace that comes from being anchored in yourself. You finally understand that peace is not the absence of noise, it's the presence of self. It's the moment you stop leaving. You used to think your empathy was a burden, that you felt too much, cared too much, loved too much. But the truth is, you were never too much. You were just never taught how to hold your depth. You were never shown that you could be both open and grounded, both giving and guarded, both compassionate and clear. Now you know, now you see, now you embody what Jung called wholeness, the integration of all your parts, the union of your heart and your boundaries, your softness and your strength. You no longer split yourself between love and protection. You have become both. And this is the moment you return to your true nature, not the empath who leaves themselves for others, but the empath who leads others back to themselves. You become the mirror that reflects clarity, the light that heals by simply being, the presence that reminds others that peace is possible. Because when you stop leaving yourself, you become what the world is starving for. A soul who can stand in love without losing in it. A heart that can stay open without breaking. A mind that can feel everything and still choose peace. A person who no longer absorbs everyone's energy because they have finally remembered what they were never meant to forget. You are not here to carry the world. You are here to become the light that teaches it how to carry itself. And as you step into that light, the light that was always yours, but long buried under layers of conditioning, the world begins to respond in a way it never has before. People no longer drain you. They either rise to meet your energy or quietly fade into the background. Conversations no longer feel like battles. They become exchanges. You no longer fear being misunderstood because your truth no longer trembles in the presence of misunderstanding. You have become internally anchored, and so the external world can no longer uproot you. You start to notice how much of life is energetic, invisible, and vibrational. How every interaction is an exchange of frequencies, not just words. And for the first time, you're no longer lost in that ocean. You are the current that directs it. You no longer absorb others' storms. You hold your own center so strongly that their chaos begins to lose its grip. This is the evolution of the empath, the one who has stopped confusing connection with containment, the one who has stopped equating love with loss, the one who no longer hides their sensitivity, but no longer sacrifices themselves to prove it either. Because real strength has nothing to do with hardness. It has everything to do with staying open, but never unguarded. You see now that your empathy was never the problem. It was your absence that created the suffering. It was the way you left your own body every time someone else's pain screamed louder than your peace. It was the way you disappeared into people who didn't even know how to hold themselves, hoping that if you could fix them, you'd finally feel safe. But safety doesn't come from saving others. It comes from staying connected to yourself, even when everything around you tries to pull you out, even when love tests your limits, even when guilt tries to whisper that your boundaries are cruelty. You've learned that choosing yourself is not selfish, it's sacred, because you cannot heal a world you're enslaved to. You cannot guide others to peace while drowning in their noise. You cannot hold space for truth if you keep abandoning your own. You cannot bring light to others if you keep dimming yours. And so you live differently now. You breathe slower. You speak less, but when you do, your words carry the weight of knowing. You listen deeply, but not to absorb, to understand. You love fully, but not to be chosen to express the truth that already lives inside you. This is power, not the loud kind, but the steady kind. The kind of power that comes from alignment. The kind that cannot be borrowed or stolen because it's not given, it's realized. When you stop leaving yourself, you no longer chase validation. You no longer perform compassion. You no longer try to be seen because you have learned how to see yourself. And that self-seeing becomes your protection. It becomes your prayer. It becomes your peace. And people feel it. Your energy starts speaking before your words do. Your presence becomes its own language, calm, certain, clear. You no longer draw in those who need fixing. You attract those who seek growth. Because your frequency no longer hums with desperation, it vibrates with dignity. You become magnetic in the most authentic way, not because you chase, but because you embody. You've become a mirror for truth itself. Your energy no longer bends toward comfort, it bends toward reality. And when you live from that place, the world starts to shape itself around your clarity. Carl Jung once said, the most terrifying thing is to accept oneself completely. But that's exactly what you've done. You've accepted that you are sensitive, intuitive, and deeply feeling, but not fragile. You've accepted that your compassion is infinite, but not free. You've accepted that your peace is priceless, and not everyone can afford it. And in that acceptance, you find what you've been searching for all along: freedom. Freedom from being the emotional sponge for a world that never knew how to hold itself. Freedom from the performance of being good at the cost of being whole. Freedom from the compulsion to carry what doesn't belong to you. You finally understand that empathy is not about merging, it's about witnessing. It's about holding awareness without absorption, presence without possession, love without loss. It's the art of being fully human, deeply feeling, fiercely free. And that freedom is contagious. Your peace starts to awaken something dormant in others. They feel safer around you, not because you absorb them, but because you no longer do. You give them permission to hold themselves. You give them the gift of your groundedness. You become proof that it is possible to love deeply without losing yourself in the process. This is the paradox of the awakened empath. The more you stay rooted in yourself, the more you can hold the world. Because real empathy isn't about absorbing energy, it's about expanding consciousness. It's the difference between drowning with someone and showing them how to swim. And this is your new way of living. You no longer walk into rooms trying to read the energy, you bring the energy. You no longer dim your light to protect others' eyes. You trust that those meant to see it will. You no longer feel responsible for healing others. You live so truthfully that your existence becomes its own medicine. You've broken the oldest contract, the one that said your worth depends on how much pain you can carry. You've rewritten it to say your worth depends on how deeply you can remain yourself. Because now you understand. You never absorbed everyone's energy because you were cursed with empathy. You absorbed it because for years you were not home inside yourself. And now that you are truly deeply home, there is no longer room for the world to live in you. You can love it, you can guide it, you can feel it, but you no longer become it. You have found the sacred space between feeling and freedom. And in that space, you finally understand you were never meant to carry the world's emotions. You were meant to teach it what it looks like when someone refuses to abandon their own. And in that realization, that final, quiet, liberating truth, everything you thought you had lost begins to return to you. Your clarity, your peace, your sense of self. It all flows back like a river, remembering its course after years of drought. You stand taller, breathe deeper, move slower. You no longer rush to fill silences, you let them speak. You no longer mistake calm for emptiness. You understand it as power. You no longer measure your worth by how much you give away. You measure it by how faithfully you remain. You realize that presence is not something you owe the world, it's something you share when it aligns, when it's true, because presence is sacred. It's the energy of someone who has gone to hell and back and came home to themselves without bitterness, without blame, but with a kind of peace that feels ancient. This is the transformation Jung spoke of, the individuation of the soul. The moment the fragmented self gathers every abandoned piece, every exiled feeling, every lost memory of power, and integrates it into something whole. You have become that, whole, no longer scattered across other people's stories, no longer dissolved in their moods, their needs, their projections. You have come back to your own gravity. And now everything orbiting your life begins to change. People who once drained you fall away, not because you push them, but because your frequency no longer feeds them. Opportunities that match your truth begin to appear, not by luck, but by resonance. Even your silence becomes fertile. Even your stillness becomes strength. Because now you move through the world as both mirror and flame, reflecting truth, radiating peace. You do not chase, you attract. You do not absorb, you illuminate. You do not perform, you embody. And the world can feel it. It can sense that something about you is different. Not louder, not tougher, but truer. Your energy no longer asks for permission. It no longer tries to fix what isn't yours. It no longer bends to fit in. It expands to redefine the space around it. You've stopped confusing empathy with endurance. You've stopped confusing love with labor. You've stopped confusing healing with control. Now, you know, love flows where truth leads, and truth only lives where self remains. This is the birth of your higher self, the one that doesn't need to prove goodness through suffering, the one that doesn't need to be chosen to feel whole, the one that knows peace is not something you find, it's something you become when you stop abandoning who you are. And when you reach this place, you stop fearing the world's heaviness. You can walk into the darkest spaces and not lose your light. You can love the broken without breaking yourself. You can feel deeply without drowning in depth. Because now you are not the sponge, you are the sea. Expansive, boundless, untamed, whole. The same sensitivity that once haunted you now becomes your wisdom. The same compassion that once drained you now becomes your strength. The same openness that once made you vulnerable now becomes your source of power. And when others look at you, when they see the calm in your eyes, the stillness in your presence, the softness that no longer bleeds, they will feel something shift inside them too. Because you have become what they've been searching for. Proof that it is possible to be both kind and strong, open and untouchable, loving and free. And that's how you change the world, not by carrying it, but by being the reminder that it never needed to be carried in the first place. It only needed someone to stand still enough, clear enough, conscious enough to show it what self-connection looks like. So let them feel your peace. Let them feel your presence. Let them feel your energy not as something that bends toward their need, but as something that stands in its own truth. Because you are no longer here to absorb the world. You are here to awaken it. You were trained to leave yourself first. Now you've remembered to stay. And in that staying, you have reclaimed everything that was ever yours. Your energy, your clarity, your wholeness, your power. You no longer walk through the world searching for belonging. You are belonging. You no longer seek home in others. You are home-rooted, radiant, real. This is what freedom feels like. Not the absence of feeling, but the presence of self in every feeling. Not the end of empathy, but the rebirth of it, clean, conscious, complete. So stand there quietly, powerfully in the stillness of your own return. Because the world will keep spinning, the noise will keep rising, and the chaos will keep calling. But you will no longer leave yourself to answer. You will stay. And in that staying, you will never absorb the world again. Because you have become something far greater than what the world can take. You have become yourself.